Story 1. Larry Eugene Mann was born on June 9, 1953, in the state of Mississippi. He came from a working-class family. His parents were not rich, and they lived in a simple home in a small town. Larry grew up like many other boys in that area. He went to the local schools and had friends in his neighborhood. There is no public record of him having a troubled childhood, but as he grew older, he began to make bad choices. After finishing school, Larry did not go to college. He stayed in Mississippi and worked at different jobs. He was not known to be a hard worker or a person who stayed in one place for a long time. He moved around and did not have a stable career. His social life was also not very organized. He got married at some point in his adult life, and he lived with his wife in Mississippi for a number of years. In 1973, when Larry was 20 years old, he committed a serious crime in Mississippi. He broke into a building and forced a young girl to perform oral sex on him. This was a violent and illegal act. The police caught him, and he was taken to court. He was found guilty of burglary and sexual assault. The judge sentenced him to 9 years in prison. Larry served 4 years of that sentence. In 1978, he was released on parole. After getting out of prison, he went back to living in Mississippi for some time. During the years after his release, Larry moved to Florida. He settled in the area of Palm Harbor, which was a semi-rural community at that time. He lived there with his wife. They had a pickup truck, which Larry used for driving around town. He did not have a steady job that was well known to the public. He kept to himself mostly. He did not have many close friends in the area. He was seen as a quiet man who did not draw much attention to himself. Larry had some habits that were noticed by people around him. He sometimes acted strangely, but nobody thought he was dangerous. His wife knew that he had a criminal past, but she stayed with him. Larry did not talk much about his time in prison. He tried to appear normal and blend in with the community. He went about his daily life without causing any obvious trouble. He drove his truck around Palm Harbor and went to different places in the area. In the years before 1980, Larry's behavior did not raise loud alarms. He was not arrested again after his release from prison. However, there was one fact about his past that was known to law enforcement. He had already been convicted of a violent crime against a young girl. This fact was on his record, but in his everyday life in Florida, he did not share this information with his neighbors. He kept his past hidden. He continued living with his wife and going about his ordinary routines. By the autumn of 1980, Larry was 27 years old. He was living in Palm Harbor with his wife. He owned a pickup truck and used it regularly. He was not working at a steady job that anyone remembered clearly. He spent his days driving around and doing small errands. His wife did not suspect that he would do anything terrible. She thought they were living a normal life. Larry did not show any clear signs of planning a new crime. He simply went from day to day. That is where his life stood in early November 1980. He was a man with a past conviction, living quietly in Florida, married, and driving his truck. Nothing about his daily actions at that time seemed to predict what was coming next. On the morning of November 4th, 1980, 10-year-old Elisa Vera Nelson woke up and got ready for school. She was a 5th grade student at Palm Harbor Elementary School in Florida. That morning, she had a dental appointment to get her braces put on. After the appointment was finished, she got on her bicycle and started riding toward the school campus. She was only about 100 yards away from the school when she came across Larry Eugene Mann. He was 27 years old at the time. He saw her riding alone, and he decided to take her. Larry Mann used force to abduct Elisa. He grabbed her and pulled her away from her bicycle. He then threw her bicycle into a ditch so that it would not be seen easily. After that, he made Elisa get into his vehicle. He drove away from the area where he had taken her. He did not take her far. He drove to an orange grove that was located near her school. This place was somewhat isolated, so people would not see what he was doing. Once they arrived at the orange grove, Larry Mann began to attack Elisa. He beat her with his hands and fists. He hit her many times. She was a small child, and she could not fight him off. After beating her, he took out a knife and stabbed her several times. The stabs went into her body and caused deep wounds. He did not stop there. He also picked up a pole that had concrete encased around it. This was a heavy and solid object. He used this concrete-encased pole to strike Elisa on the head. The blow was extremely hard. It fractured her skull. The damage to her head was severe and fatal. These actions caused her death. She died there in the orange grove. After the murder, Larry Mann left Elisa's body in the orange grove. He did not try to hide it. He simply left it there and drove away. Her body was not discovered until the next day, November 5th, 1980. When people found her, the semi-rural community of Palm Harbor was deeply shocked. A young girl had been killed in a brutal way, and nobody knew who had done it at that time. On the same afternoon that he killed Elisa, Larry Mann attempted to take his own life. He tried to commit suicide. The police were called and they intervened. They stopped him from killing himself and took him to a hospital for medical care. While he was at the hospital, Mann spoke to the police officers. He told them that he had done something stupid. However, the officers misunderstood his words. They thought he was talking about his suicide attempt. They did not realize that he was actually referring to the murder of Elisa Nelson. Because of this misunderstanding, the police did not question him further about the girl. They let him stay in the hospital without connecting him to the crime. For days passed after the murder. On November 8th, 1980, Larry Mann's wife was looking through her husband's pickup truck. She was searching for his spectacles because he needed them. While she was looking inside the truck, she found something unusual. It was a handwritten note. The note was stained with blood. She looked at it more closely and saw that it was not her own writing. The note belonged to Elisa Nelson. It had been written by Elisa's mother. The note was meant to explain to Elisa's teacher why Elisa was late to school that morning. The mother had given the note to Elisa so she could hand it to her teacher. But somehow, that note had ended up in Larry Mann's truck, and it had blood on it. This was a very important discovery. Larry Mann's wife did not ignore what she found. She knew that something was wrong. She took the note and reported it to the authorities. She told the police about the blood-stained note and where she had found it. This was the moment that the police began to focus their attention on Larry Mann. They now had a direct piece of evidence that linked him to the missing girl. The wife's discovery was the key step that moved the case forward. At this point, Larry Mann was still in the hospital from his suicide attempt. He had not been arrested yet, but the police now had a reason to look more closely at him and his truck. They also had other evidence that would later connect him to the crime. One piece of that evidence was fingerprint matching. The police found fingerprints in the truck and on other items that matched Larry Mann. The blood on the note also pointed to him. Everything that happened in these days showed a clear chain of events. First, Mann took Elisa from her bicycle. Then he drove her to the orange grove. Then he beat her, stabbed her, and crushed her head with the heavy pole. This caused her death. Then he tried to kill himself. Then his wife found the note in his truck. Each action led directly to the next step, and each piece of evidence was discovered in a logical order. The police now had the information they needed to start their investigation in earnest. On November 10th, 1980, 2 days after Larry Mann's wife found the blood-stained note in his truck, the police formally arrested him. They used the evidence they had gathered, including the note and the fingerprint matches, to charge him with the crime. On that same day, Mann was officially charged with the first-degree murder of Elisa Vera Nelson. He was also charged with kidnapping her. He was taken into custody and held in jail while the legal process began. The case went to trial several months later. On March 16, 1981, the trial started at the Pinellas County Circuit Court in Florida. A jury was selected to hear the evidence. During the trial, the prosecutors presented the facts of the case. They showed how Mann had taken Elisa, beaten her, stabbed her, and crushed her head with the concrete-encased pole. They also showed the note and the fingerprints that connected him to the crime. The judge allowed the jurors to visit the orange grove where Elisa had been killed. This visit helped them understand the location and the details of the crime scene. The trial did not last long. On March 19, 1981, the jury reached a verdict. They found Larry Eugene Mann guilty of both kidnapping and first-degree murder. The decision was unanimous. The next day, on March 20, 1981, the same jury was asked to recommend whether Mann should receive the death penalty. After considering the case, they recommended that he be put to death. On March 26, 1981, Circuit Court Judge Philip A. Federico held the formal sentencing hearing. The judge agreed with the prosecution. He stated that the murder was heinous, atrocious, and cruel. He said that the crime was so severe that it deserved the strongest punishment allowed by law. The judge sentenced Larry Mann to death by the electric chair. In addition, the judge gave Mann a separate sentence of 99 years in prison for the kidnapping charge. This meant that even if the death penalty were not carried out, he would spend the rest of his life in prison. However, the legal process did not end there. Mann and his lawyers filed appeals to challenge the death sentence. On September 2, 1982, the Florida Supreme Court looked at the case. They found that the trial judge had made several errors during the original sentencing phase. Because of these mistakes, they vacated the death sentence. This meant that Mann would have a new sentencing hearing. A new sentencing hearing was held, and on January 14, 1983, Mann was sentenced to death for a second time. But Mann continued to appeal. On May 24, 1984, the Florida Supreme Court reviewed the case again. This time, they dismissed his appeal and upheld his second death sentence. Mann then took his case to the highest court in the country. On January 14, 1985, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected his appeal. Mann did not give up. In November 1985, he was one of 5 death row inmates who asked the state parole board for clemency, but that request did not stop the process. In early 1986, Florida Governor Bob Graham signed a death warrant for Mann. His execution was scheduled for February 4, 1986. The state courts rejected his request for a stay, meaning he would have to face the execution. But on the night before the scheduled date, February 3, 1986, U.S. District Judge Elizabeth A. Kovacevic stepped in. She granted Mann's appeal and stayed the execution. This stopped the procedure from happening. The federal appeals continued for many years. On May 14, 1987, the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals overturned Mann's death sentence once again. This meant another new sentencing hearing had to take place. On February 6, 1990, a different jury was brought in. They heard the case and once again recommended the death penalty for Mann. On March 2, 1990, Circuit Judge James R. Case officially sentenced Mann to death for the 3rd time. Mann's lawyers filed more appeals. On April 2, 1992, the Florida Supreme Court denied his appeal against this 3rd sentence. Later, on September 28, 2000, they turned down another appeal. On July 12, 2001, his request for a writ of habeas corpus was also rejected. The case remained on appeal for many years after that. Then, on March 1, 2013, Florida Governor Rick Scott signed a new death warrant for Mann. His execution was set for April 10, 2013. Mann's lawyers filed one final appeal with the Florida Supreme Court on March 25, 2013. On April 2, 2013, the court turned down that appeal. Mann's team then appealed to the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, but on April 9, 2013, that court also denied his request. On the afternoon of April 10, 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear Mann's final appeal. With all legal options exhausted, the state moved forward with the execution. More than an hour after the Supreme Court's decision, Larry Eugene Mann, now 59 years old, was put to death at the Florida State Prison. He was executed by lethal injection. The drugs were administered to him, and the official time of death was recorded as 7:19 p.m., 15 minutes after the drugs began to flow. For his last meal, he ordered fried shrimp, fish, scallops, stuffed crabs, hot butter rolls, coleslaw, pistachio ice cream, and Pepsi. After the execution, the community remembered Elisa Nelson. 3 decades after her death, the Palm Harbor Elementary School named a mural and a reading corner in her honor. The old school campus where she was taken was closed in 2009, but a new school was built in its place. In 2019, the Pinellas County School Board decided to name that new school Elisa Nelson Elementary, so that her name would never be forgotten. In addition, investigators continued to look at Larry Mann as a suspect in other murders that happened in Mississippi during the 1970s. These included the killings of 13-year-old Rose Marie Lewandowski in 1973, 16-year-old Janie Sanders in 1975, 20-year-old Deborah Gunter in 1978, and Clara Turk in 1979. Mann was named as a suspect in these unsolved cases because they shared similarities with the murder of Elisa Nelson. However, as of the time of his execution, these other murders were not officially solved, and some investigations suggested that another person might have been responsible for them. The case of Larry Eugene Mann came to a complete end with his execution on April 10, 2013, and Elisa Nelson's name lives on in the school that bears her memory. Story 2. Ronnie Paul Threadgill was born on February 20th, 1973, in Dallas County, Texas. He was raised in a family that had many serious problems. His mother struggled with drug addiction. She was arrested for drug possession and spent time on parole. His mother also had a criminal record. His male relatives and his 3 siblings all had criminal records as well. The home where Ronnie grew up was not stable. There was abuse and chaos in his childhood. His life was difficult from a very young age. Ronnie went to school, but he only completed 9 years of education. He did not finish high school. As a young man, he worked at different jobs. He worked as a barber, a cook, and a laborer. These jobs did not last long because Ronnie kept getting into trouble with the law. When Ronnie turned 18 years old, he committed his first felony crime. This was the start of a pattern that would continue for many years. He was arrested and sent to prison multiple times. In 1994, he received a 10-year prison sentence for 2 crimes. The first crime was burglary of a building. The second crime was possession of cocaine. He went to prison for these offenses, but after only 3 months, he was released on something called shock probation. This meant the judge let him out early to give him a chance to change his behavior. That chance did not work. About 1 year after his release, Ronnie was arrested again. In February 1996, he was transferred from the county jail back to the state prison. He stayed there until December 1997, when he was released once more. In June 1998, Ronnie was involved in a shooting in Limestone County, Texas. This was a gang-related shooting. He was charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. The charge said that Ronnie shot a man named Eric Martin. Witnesses identified Ronnie as the shooter. Because of this charge, Ronnie spent about 1 year in jail. However, the charges against him were later dropped. The official reason given for dropping the case was conflicting evidence. A sheriff's deputy who investigated the shooting later testified that sometimes cases are dismissed because of who the victims are or what they have done in the past. The victim in that shooting had a criminal record. So the case against Ronnie did not go to trial, and he was released from that charge. But Ronnie did not stay out of trouble for long. In July 2000, he was sent back to prison again. He had violated the rules of his release. He stayed in prison for several months. Then, in January 2001, he was released once more on mandatory supervision. Mandatory supervision is a type of parole where the prisoner is allowed to leave prison but must follow strict rules. He was now 28 years old. By this point in his life, Ronnie had spent most of his adult years behind bars. Since turning 18, he had been incarcerated for the majority of the time. He had accumulated many criminal convictions. These included misdemeanor convictions for assault, resisting arrest, theft, criminal trespass, criminal mischief, and possession of marijuana. He also had felony convictions for possession of cocaine and burglary. While in prison, he had also gotten into trouble. He got into a fight with another inmate. He was disciplined for threatening other inmates. He was also found wearing the wrong color jumpsuit, which could have helped him escape. When Ronnie was released in January 2001, he tried to live as a free man. But his past was full of crime and prison time. He had not learned how to stay out of trouble. He had a family history of drug abuse and crime. His mother encouraged her children in criminal activity. His own behavior showed that he could not follow the rules of society. He was now out of prison again, with no clear plan for his future. He was living in Texas, trying to get by, but his history of violence and crime followed him everywhere he went. On the evening of April 14, 2001, a birthday party was being held at a place called the Pleasure Garden Club in Navarro County, Texas. The party was for Christopher Lane and his sister, Mona Lane. Many people attended the party. The party continued late into the night. It finally ended sometime between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. on the morning of April 15, 2001. When the party ended, 3 young men walked out of the club together. These 3 men were Christopher Lane, Kevin Williams, and Dexter McDonald. Christopher Lane was the owner of a car. He planned to drive the other 2 men home. Kevin Williams got into the front passenger seat of Christopher's car. Dexter McDonald got into the right rear passenger seat of the car. Christopher Lane got into the driver's seat. However, before he could drive away, Christopher got back out of the car to talk to someone he knew. He left the car running with the driver's side door still open. He left Kevin Williams and Dexter McDonald sitting inside the car while he stepped away to have a conversation. At this same time, Ronnie Threadgill was also at the Pleasure Garden Club. He had been seen earlier in the night sitting in an old car that was parked next to Christopher's car in the parking lot. Now Threadgill made a sudden move. He ran up to Christopher's car. He was wearing blue jeans and a white t-shirt. He had a bandana covering the lower part of his face, from his nose down to his chin. He was carrying a black handgun. Threadgill ran to the open driver's side door of the car. Kevin Williams, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, saw Threadgill lean into the car. Threadgill pointed the gun at Williams's face. Then Threadgill fired 2 shots from the handgun. The first shot did not hit anyone. The bullet went into the car but missed all the passengers. The second shot hit Dexter McDonald, who was sitting in the back seat. The bullet went through McDonald's arm and then entered his chest. McDonald was hurt very badly. When the shooting started, Kevin Williams acted quickly to escape. He jumped out of the car and got away from the scene. He was not injured. Threadgill then got into the driver's seat of Christopher's car. He was now in control of the vehicle. He began to drive away from the club parking lot, but he did not go far. He stopped the car at a nearby stop sign. At that stop sign, Threadgill pulled Dexter McDonald out of the car. McDonald was still alive at that moment, but he was badly wounded. Threadgill left McDonald lying on the ground. Then Threadgill got back into the car and drove away, leaving McDonald behind on the ground. Some of the friends who had been at the party saw what happened. They rushed to help Dexter McDonald. They picked him up and took him to Navarro County Regional Hospital. The doctors tried to save him, but the gunshot wound was too severe. The bullet had gone through his arm and into his chest, damaging his internal organs. Dexter McDonald died at the hospital from this gunshot wound. He was only 17 years old. Several witnesses saw parts of the crime. Danielle Dwayne Nellums was at the party and was walking toward Christopher's car when the attack happened. He saw a man run from behind the car and jump into the driver's seat. He saw the man fire a shot and then saw Kevin Williams jump out. He saw the man fire a second shot, which struck Dexter McDonald. Then he saw the man drive away. Nellums could not identify the shooter in a photo lineup the next day because the shooter had a bandana covering his face. However, Nellums recognized the shooter as the same person he had seen earlier in the night, sitting in an old car parked next to Christopher's car. He later testified in court that he was positive that the shooter was Ronnie Threadgill. Mona Lane also saw parts of the crime. She did not see the shooter's face because she saw him from the back. But she saw a car that had been parked in the club's parking lot earlier that night pull up beside her brother's car. She saw the driver jump out and run around her brother's car. She heard him yelling at the passengers to get out. Then she heard gunshots. Mona Lane identified Threadgill as the man she had seen earlier in the night, sitting in the driver's seat of that car in the parking lot. Kevin Williams, the passenger who escaped, also saw the shooter. But he did not get a good look at the shooter's face because the bandana covered the lower half of the shooter's face. Williams testified that he believed the skin color of the shooter was a little lighter than Threadgill's skin color. He was positive about that detail. However, he also agreed that he was not saying that Threadgill was not the shooter. He agreed that it could have been Threadgill. The crime happened very quickly. Threadgill had taken Christopher Lane's car without permission. He had used a gun to threaten the passengers. He had fired the gun inside the car at close range. He had shot a 17-year-old boy in the chest. Then he had pulled that injured boy out of the car and left him on the ground to die. He drove away in the stolen car. The witnesses who saw the attack were shocked and frightened. They called for help and took Dexter McDonald to the hospital, but it was too late. Dexter McDonald was dead. Immediately after the shooting, witnesses at the Pleasure Garden Club called the police to report what had happened. The police sent out a dispatch to all officers in the area. The dispatch described the stolen vehicle and gave information about the crime. Officers from the Ennis Police Department heard the dispatch over their radios. They began looking for the vehicle that matched the description. The officers spotted Christopher Lane's car traveling on Interstate 45. They turned on their sirens and flashing lights and began to pursue the vehicle. The driver of the stolen car saw the police behind him. He exited the freeway and tried to turn the wrong way onto a one-way service road. The driver then slammed on the brakes. The car skidded into a ditch and became stuck. The vehicle was now disabled and could not move. The driver got out of the car and ran away on foot. He ran to a nearby mobile gas station where many large semi-trucks were parked. The police officers surrounded the gas station so the driver could not escape. They searched the area carefully. They found Ronnie Threadgill hiding underneath a semi-truck trailer. He was clinging to the axle of the trailer, trying to stay out of sight. He was still wearing the same clothes he had worn during the crime, blue jeans and a white t-shirt. Under the frame of the trailer where Threadgill was hiding, the officers found a bandana. This bandana matched the description given by witnesses who said the shooter was wearing a bandana over his face. Officer Randy Owen identified Threadgill as the person he saw get out of the stolen car and the same person he found hiding under the truck. The police gathered physical evidence from the scene. They lifted fingerprints from the rear passenger door of Christopher's car. They compared those fingerprints to Threadgill's fingerprints. The fingerprints matched. They also took samples of blood that was on Threadgill's clothing. They compared that blood to blood samples from Dexter McDonald. The blood on Threadgill's clothes matched McDonald's blood exactly. This evidence placed Threadgill inside the stolen car and connected him directly to the victim. Threadgill was arrested at the truck stop. Because he had been released from prison on mandatory supervision in January 2001, his arrest also meant he had violated the conditions of his parole. He was taken into custody. The police and prosecutors built their case against him. A grand jury in Navarro County indicted Threadgill for the crime of capital murder. The case went to trial in July 2002. During the trial, the prosecution presented the evidence to the jury. They showed the fingerprint evidence, the blood evidence, and the testimony of the witnesses who saw the crime. The defense tried to argue that the shooter might have been someone else, but the evidence was very strong. On July 18, 2002, the jury found Ronnie Threadgill guilty of capital murder. The next day, July 19, 2002, the same jury heard testimony during the punishment phase. They learned about Threadgill's long criminal history. They heard testimony from law enforcement officers that his reputation was bad. They considered whether he would be a future danger to society. The jury decided that there was a probability that Threadgill would commit future acts of criminal violence. They also decided that there were no mitigating circumstances sufficient to warrant a life sentence. The jury recommended the death penalty. The trial judge sentenced Threadgill to death by lethal injection. Threadgill then began a long series of appeals. His direct appeal went to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. On October 13, 2004, that court affirmed his conviction and death sentence. Threadgill also filed a state habeas corpus application. On October 5, 2005, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denied that application. He then took his case to federal court. He filed a petition for a federal writ of habeas corpus in the Northern District of Texas. On August 10, 2009, that federal court denied his petition. He appealed to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. On May 12, 2011, the Fifth Circuit affirmed the denial of relief. He then filed a petition with the United States Supreme Court. On January 17, 2012, the Supreme Court denied his request to review the case. On August 28, 2012, the 13th District Court of Navarro County set Threadgill's execution date for April 16, 2013. As that date approached, his lawyers continued to fight. On April 11, 2013, they filed another petition with the United States Supreme Court. They asked the court to stop the execution and review his case again. The state of Texas filed a response on April 12, 2013, arguing that the appeal had no merit. On the day of the execution, the Supreme Court rejected the appeal in a brief order. The execution would proceed. On April 16, 2013, at 6 p.m., Ronnie Threadgill was taken to the execution chamber in Huntsville, Texas. He was 40 years old. No friends or relatives of Dexter McDonald came to watch the execution, but some of Threadgill's friends were in a viewing room. Threadgill gave his final statement. He said, "To my loved ones and my dear friends, I love y'all and appreciate y'all for being there. I am going to a better place. To all the guys back on the row, keep your heads up, keep fighting. I'm ready. Let's go." He nodded to a female friend in the viewing room and smiled. The lethal injection of pentobarbital was then started. He took several deep breaths and then began snoring loudly. Within a few seconds, the sound stopped. 25 minutes later, at 6:39 p.m., the medical staff pronounced Ronnie Paul Threadgill dead. Dexter McDonald's family had lost their son, 17-year-old, and now Threadgill had paid the ultimate price for that crime. The case was finally closed. Story 3. Richard Aaron Cobb was born on April 2, 1984. He was a white male with brown hair and blue eyes. He was born in Smith County, Texas. His birth mother had serious problems. She used alcohol and drugs. Because of her addiction, she could not take care of her children properly. The home where Richard and his brothers lived was in very bad condition. It was dirty and full of roaches. The children did not get enough food or care. They were often left alone. They suffered from abuse and extreme neglect. Their mother could not provide a safe place for them to live. Because of this, Richard and two of his brothers were placed in foster care. The state took them away from their biological mother. A woman named Edna Bell decided to adopt all three boys. She wanted to give them a stable home. She loved them and tried to take care of them. Edna Bell saw that the boys had serious emotional problems from the very beginning. She took them to get psychological treatment. She tried to help them with therapy, but the problems were deep. The boys had a hard time adjusting to normal life. They had trouble following rules and controlling their anger. Richard started using drugs at a very young age. He was only 12 years old when he first tried drugs. This became a pattern in his life. He used drugs often. He also started getting into trouble with the law while he was still a teenager. One incident happened when Richard was a juvenile. He, his brother, and a friend broke into a house that belonged to a neighbor. The neighbor only used the house on weekends. They burglarized it. The neighbor came home and caught them. He had a gun. He pointed it at the boys. Richard was not afraid. He dared the neighbor to shoot him. The neighbor did not shoot Richard. Instead, he shot at the ground near Richard's feet. He forced Richard to lie down on the ground. He held him there until Richard's mother and the police arrived. Richard also went to a boot camp. This was a program for young offenders. It was meant to teach discipline, but Richard did not follow the rules there either. He assaulted one of his supervisors at the boot camp. He showed no fear of people in authority. He would not obey the rules whether he was in boot camp or on probation. His mother, Edna Bell, had a very hard time controlling him. He would not listen to her. He did what he wanted. He did not care about the consequences. His reputation in the community was bad. People knew he did not follow the law. Richard attended high school in Jacksonville, Texas. Later, he moved to Rusk, Texas, and attended school there. He did not finish his education. He dropped out halfway through his senior year. He never got a high school diploma. As a young adult, Richard had a dream. He wanted to join the military. He thought about enlisting, but he could not do that. He had felony convictions on his record. The military does not accept people with felony records. His criminal past disqualified him from serving. He worked as a laborer. He got temporary jobs through a local temp agency. He did manual work. He was not making much money. He also had a drug debt. He owed money to a drug dealer. He needed cash quickly. Richard had prior criminal convictions. One was for unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. Another was for burglary of a building. These were felony crimes. He was on probation at the time of some of these offenses. He had a history of breaking the law. He started with smaller crimes. Then he moved to burglaries. The burglaries were his way of getting money. He was in debt. He was using drugs. He was not following the rules of society. His life was heading in a bad direction. He had no stable job, no education, and a growing criminal record. He was not able to hold down a steady life. His behavior showed that he did not care about other people's property or safety. He had two brothers who also had problems. They were all adopted together, but the emotional damage from their early childhood was severe. Richard grew up with a lack of structure. He did not respect authority. He had a temper. He was not easily influenced by others to do good things. He seemed to do whatever he wanted. By the time he was 18 years old, Richard was an adult. He was still living in the area. He had a criminal history. He had a drug addiction. He owed money. He was on probation. He had no real future planned. He worked low-paying jobs. He was spending his time with other people who also broke the law. He was not changing his behavior. He continued to make bad choices. His life was stuck in a cycle of crime and drug use. He was not able to break free from the problems that started in his childhood. Richard Cobb was now 18 years old. He had a friend named Bunka Adams. Adams was 19. The two young men had known each other since they were in ninth grade. They met at a boot camp for young offenders. They stayed in contact after that. In August 2002, they committed 2 armed robberies together. Both robberies were at gas stations. In both robberies, they used a shotgun. They got money from these robberies, but they wanted more money. They needed cash quickly. On the night of September 2nd, 2002, Cobb and Adams committed a third robbery. This time they chose a convenience store called BDJ's. The store was in Rusk, Texas. They went there at night. They brought a shotgun with them. They also wore masks to cover their faces. They wore gloves so they would not leave fingerprints. At that time, 2 young women were working inside the store. Their names were Nikki Ansley and Candace Driver. Nikki was 19 years old. Candace was 23 years old. There was also a customer in the store. His name was Kenneth Van Dever. He was 24 years old. Kenneth had brain damage from a car accident he had when he was in college. Because of this, he had the mental ability of a child. He did not understand things the way other adults did. He frequently came to this store as a customer. Sometimes he helped clean the store or take out the trash. Cobb and Adams entered the store with the shotgun. They ordered Nikki and Candace to stand together behind the cash register. They demanded money. Candace opened the cash register drawer. Adams took all the money from the drawer. Cobb was holding the shotgun during this time. Kenneth Van Dever was sitting in the eating area of the store. He did not know what was happening at first. When he stood up and started to walk toward the front door, the robbers noticed him. They ordered him to come and stand with the 2 women behind the register. He did as he was told. Cobb and Adams then made a decision. They decided not to just rob the store and leave. They decided to take the 3 people with them as hostages. They wanted to use Candace's car. Candace had borrowed a Cadillac to drive to work. It was parked outside. Adams demanded the keys to the car. Candace went to the back room to get the keys. She gave them to Adams. The robbers forced the 3 hostages into the Cadillac. Adams drove the car. Cobb sat with the hostages. They drove south on a highway. As they were driving, Nikki recognized Adams. She had gone to school with him. She said, "I know you, don't I?" Adams answered yes and took off his mask. He did not put the mask back on. Adams turned off the road. He drove into a remote, open field. This field was known locally as the Pea Patch. It was near Alto, Texas. It was a rural area. There were no houses nearby. Adams stopped the car. Everyone got out of the car. Adams ordered Candace and Kenneth to get into the trunk of the Cadillac. Cobb was holding the shotgun while this happened. They got into the trunk. Adams then took Nikki away from the car. He led her into a wooded area. There, Adams raped Nikki. Cobb did not participate in the rape. He held the gun nearby. After Adams finished, he brought Nikki back to the car. He let Candace and Kenneth out of the trunk. Adams told the 3 victims that he and Cobb were waiting for Adams's friends to arrive. He said the victims could wait for a little while and then leave. He allowed the victims to begin walking away. They started to walk. But a short time later, Adams changed his mind. He said he was afraid the victims would reach a house before he and Cobb could get away. He called them back. He and Cobb then made the 3 victims kneel on the ground. They used the women's own shirts to tie their hands behind their backs. Kenneth was not tied up. Cobb and Adams began walking away with Kenneth. Their plan was to let Kenneth come back later to untie the women, but they soon returned with Kenneth. Now they stood behind the 3 victims. They had a discussion. They were deciding what to do. Adams then ordered Kenneth, who had stood up again, to kneel behind the women. Kenneth did not understand the danger. He said it was time for him to take his medicine. He said he was ready to go home. He said these words calmly. He did not realize he was about to be killed. Cobb raised the shotgun and shot Kenneth. Kenneth fell forward. He screamed that he had been shot. Then either Cobb or Adams shot Nikki. She was hit in the left shoulder. She fell forward. She pretended to be dead. Candace was not hit by the first shots, but she also fell forward and pretended to be hit. Adams walked over to Candace. He asked if she was bleeding. She did not answer. She kept pretending to be dead. Adams said, "Are you bleeding? You better answer me. I'll shoot you in the face if you don't answer me." Candace said, No, I'm not bleeding." Adams then fired the shotgun near her face. The shotgun pellets hit her lip. She again fell forward and pretended to be dead. Then Adams and Cobb turned to Nikki. They asked her the same questions. Nikki did not answer. She kept pretending to be dead. The two men started kicking her. They kicked her for about a minute. They were trying to see if she would react. She did not react. Then Cobb lifted her up by her ponytail. He held a lighter up to her face. He wanted to see if she was still alive. She kept her eyes still and did not move. She continued to play dead. Cobb said, "She's dead. Let's go." The two men believed all three victims were dead. They got into the Cadillac. They drove away from the pea patch. They went to the house of Adams's cousin. After the men left, the survivors started to move. Kenneth Van Dever was dead. The shotgun wound to his chest had killed him. But Nikki and Candace were still alive. Nikki had been shot in the shoulder. She had broken ribs and a collapsed lung. Her ribs were broken from the kicking. She was bleeding and in great pain. Candace had a gunshot wound to her lower lip. Candace was able to get up. She ran to a nearby house to get help. Nikki also got up. She was badly hurt. She walked about half a mile in the dark. She was bleeding and in pain. She had broken ribs and a collapsed lung. She kept walking until she found a house. She reached the house and got help. Medical help arrived. Nikki was taken to a hospital by helicopter. She needed emergency surgery. She stayed in the hospital for almost 2 weeks. She had a collapsed lung. She had numerous broken ribs. She had a shotgun wound. Candace also went to the hospital for her wound. While in the hospital, Nikki looked at photographs of possible suspects. She identified both Cobb and Adams from the photo lineup. Candace was also shown photographs. She was able to identify Adams. She was not able to identify Cobb from the photos. The two men had committed a series of crimes that night. They had committed armed robbery. They had committed kidnapping. They had committed sexual assault. They had committed murder. All of these acts happened in a short period of time. The events of that night changed the lives of everyone involved. Kenneth Van Dever was dead. Nikki and Candace were injured and traumatized. Cobb and Adams had left the scene. They thought they had gotten away with it, but they had made mistakes. They had left survivors. The survivors would be able to tell the police what happened. The survivors would be witnesses. After Cobb and Adams left the pea patch, they believed all three victims were dead. They drove to the house of Adams's cousin. They stayed there. They thought they had gotten away with their crimes. But the survivors had already started getting help. Nikki Ansley and Candace Driver had both made it to safety. They were taken to hospitals. While they were in the hospital, police showed them photographs of possible suspects. Nikki identified both Cobb and Adams from the photo lineup. Candace identified Adams from the photo lineup. She could not identify Cobb at that time. But the police now had names and faces. They knew who they were looking for. The cousin of Bunka Adams contacted the police. He told them where Cobb and Adams were staying. He gave them the address. On September 3rd, 2002, police went to the cousin's house. That was the day after the murder. They arrived at the house to arrest both men. Adams surrendered to the police without any trouble. He gave himself up. But Cobb did not surrender. He resisted arrest. The police had to subdue him. They used force to restrain him. He was taken into custody. Once he was in custody, police questioned Cobb. He gave a confession. He admitted that he shot Kenneth Van Dever. He admitted that he participated in the robbery. He admitted that he participated in the kidnapping. He also admitted that he and Adams had robbed 2 gas stations a month earlier. In both of those robberies, they also used a shotgun. This confession was recorded and later used in court. The 2 men were separated after their arrest. They were taken to jail. On September 23, 2002, Cobb was indicted for capital murder. This happened just 3 weeks after the murder. The indictment stated that he committed murder during the course of a kidnapping and a robbery. Cobb's trial began on January 5, 2004. He was tried in Cherokee County, Texas. The prosecution presented the evidence against him. They brought in Nikki and Candace to testify. Both women described what happened to them on the night of September 2, 2002. They told the jury about the robbery, the kidnapping, the rape, and the shooting. They described how they pretended to be dead. They described how Cobb shot Kenneth. They described everything. Cobb testified in his own defense during the trial. He did not deny that he participated in the robbery and kidnapping. He also admitted that he shot Kenneth Van Dever, but he gave a different reason for his actions. He claimed that Adams pressured him. He said Adams threatened to kill him if he did not help shoot the hostages. He told the jury that he was afraid of Adams. He said he acted under duress. The prosecution did not believe this story. They pointed out that Cobb did not mention any coercion when he first confessed to police. They also pointed out that the surviving witnesses did not hear any threats from Adams. Neither Nikki nor Candace heard Adams threaten Cobb. The prosecution said Cobb was lying to avoid responsibility. The prosecution called another witness. His name was William Elmer Thompson. Thompson was in jail with Cobb. They were held in the same cell block. Thompson testified that Cobb had talked to him about the crime. According to Thompson, Cobb said that armed robberies were the way to go. He said they were fast, quick, easy money. Thompson also testified that Cobb told him he planned to blame the murder on Adams. Cobb planned to lie and say Adams threatened him. Thompson said Cobb told him he learned the women survived. Cobb said he was mad about that. He said if they had died, he probably would not be in jail. Thompson said Cobb told him he would commit the crime again. During Thompson's testimony, Cobb stood up in the courtroom. He shouted at Thompson. He called him a liar. The judge told Cobb to sit down and be quiet. Cobb sat down, but the outburst happened in front of the jury. They saw his reaction. After hearing all the evidence, the jury deliberated. On January 16, 2004, they reached a verdict. They found Cobb guilty of capital murder. He was convicted. The trial then moved to the punishment phase. The jury had to decide if Cobb should be sentenced to death or life in prison. The prosecution presented more evidence. They called witnesses who talked about Cobb's bad reputation. They talked about his prior criminal acts. They showed that Cobb had a history of breaking the law. They talked about the 2 gas station robberies he committed with Adams in August 2002. They talked about the burglary he committed as a juvenile. They called a psychologist who testified that Cobb was a sociopath. The psychologist said Cobb did not care about other people. He said Cobb's condition could not be cured. The defense also presented evidence. Cobb's adoptive mother, Edna Bell, testified. She told the jury that she adopted Richard and his 2 brothers. She explained that they had serious emotional problems from the beginning. She described the bad conditions in their biological mother's home. Other witnesses testified about Cobb's biological mother's drug and alcohol problems. They said Cobb had brain damage because of his mother's addiction while she was pregnant. The defense wanted the jury to understand that Cobb had a difficult childhood. Cobb also testified during the punishment phase. He told the jury that he started using drugs at age 12. He said he committed robberies because he owed money to a drug dealer. He needed cash quickly. The jury had to answer 2 special questions. First, they had to decide if Cobb would be a future danger to society. Second, they had to decide if mitigating circumstances made life in prison better than death. The jury answered yes to the first question. They believed Cobb would commit future acts of violence. They answered no to the second question. They did not believe mitigating circumstances deserved a life sentence. On January 23, 2004, the judge sentenced Cobb to death. He was sent to death row. He was 20 years old. After the sentence, Cobb began the appeals process. His conviction and sentence were automatically appealed to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. On January 31, 2007, that court affirmed his conviction and sentence. They upheld the death penalty. Then Cobb filed a state habeas corpus application. He asked the court to review his case again. On December 5, 2007, the state denied his application. He then filed a federal habeas petition. He asked a federal court to review his case. On February 15, 2011, the federal district court denied his petition. He appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. On May 25, 2012, the Fifth Circuit affirmed the denial of his petition. On January 14, 2013, the United States Supreme Court declined to review his case. He had exhausted his appeals. On April 17, 2013, Cobb filed another habeas application with the state trial court. On April 19, 2013, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals dismissed this application. On April 24, 2013, Cobb filed a petition with the U.S. Supreme Court asking them to stop his execution. On April 25, 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court denied this petition. On April 25, 2013, Cobb was scheduled to be executed. He was 29 years old. He had spent 10 years on death row. The execution took place in Huntsville, Texas. The state used lethal injection. Cobb gave a final statement. He said, "Life is death and death is life. I hope that someday this absurdity that humanity has come to will come to an end. Life is too short, and I hope anyone that has negative energy towards me will resolve that." After the drugs began to flow, Cobb lifted his head from the gurney. He said, "Wow, this is great. Thank you, Warden." Then he dropped his head back. At 6:27 p.m., he was pronounced dead. He became the fourth person executed in Texas in 2013 and the ninth person executed in the entire United States that year. Nikki Ansley and her family came to witness the execution. Nikki watched through the window as Cobb died. She said she saw the same evil person she saw 11 years earlier. She was glad he knew she was there. But she also said she had forgiven both men years ago. She still suffered from pain in her back because of the shotgun wound. She knew the execution did not change what happened to her. It did not take away the physical and emotional pain. Donald Van Dever, Kenneth's father, also came to witness the execution. He said it was way too easy on Cobb. He said Cobb just went to sleep. He said Kenneth was gone and nothing would bring him back. He believed justice was served, but it did not change anything. Cobb's co-defendant, Bunka Adams, had been executed 1 year earlier. He was executed on April 26, 2012. Adams was also sentenced to death for his role in the crimes. The two survivors, Nikki and Candace, went on with their lives. Nikki became an inspirational speaker. She spoke in churches and in public. She shared her story to help others. She wanted to show that she survived. Candace also recovered from her injuries. Both women testified against Cobb at his trial. Their testimony was important in securing his conviction. The case was closed. Richard Aaron Cobb was dead. He was convicted of capital murder and executed by the state of Texas. The justice system had run its course from the crime on September 2, 2002, to the execution on April 25, 2013. The story ended with the death of the man who committed the murder. Story 4. Stephen T. Smith was born on February 9, 1967. He was the second of 4 children born to his mother, Jane Mosier. His biological father was a man named William Haught. William Haught never had any contact with Stephen while Stephen was growing up. Stephen did not know his biological father and had no relationship with him. Stephen's mother later married a man who was abusive. This man drank alcohol heavily. He also used drugs. He threatened to burn the family's house down. Stephen lived in this home with his mother and his siblings. The abusive stepfather would physically beat Stephen with a belt. This happened regularly throughout Stephen's childhood. Stephen received very little attention from his mother during those years. His mother did not pay much attention to his well-being or his daily life. Later, Stephen's mother married another man named Cale Mosier. Cale Mosier was described as a decent guy. Stephen called Cale Mosier his dad. Cale Mosier was a positive influence in Stephen's life. He took care of Stephen and treated him well. Stephen's grandmother also helped care for him. She was his primary caregiver for some time. His aunt also helped from time to time. However, neither his grandmother nor his aunt were a significant and continuous presence in his life. Stephen did not have stable, consistent care from adults during his childhood. When Stephen was around 9 or 10 years old, he started drinking alcohol. This was very young. He continued to drink as he grew older. He became a heavy drinker over time. People who knew him said that he could drink a lot of alcohol without showing obvious signs of being drunk. He was known to consume as many as 12 beers in a single day. He also had a history of blacking out from alcohol. Blacking out meant that he would drink so much that he could not remember what happened during those times. Stephen went to school like other children. He was an average student. He did not stand out as particularly smart or particularly struggling. In high school, he ranked 149 out of 162 students in his class. This meant he was near the bottom of his class. Tests showed that his IQ was 80. This is in the low average range of intelligence. He scored low on tests that measured information and vocabulary. However, he did fine on basic arithmetic. He also scored low on tests that measured his social skills. He had difficulty understanding and processing information at times. Despite his struggles, people who knew Stephen described him as a good boy. They said he loved school. They said he loved to work. They also said he got along with everybody. He did not cause trouble in his community. When he was 17 years old, Stephen left his home. He went to live and work on a farm. He stayed there for some time. He supported himself through work. As an adult, Stephen had several jobs. He worked to earn money and support himself. He also had relationships with women. He had a girlfriend at one point, and they had a child together. That child was a daughter named Brittany. Brittany was born around 1992. Stephen also babysat his cousins and his sister's children. His sister, Karen Samples, trusted him to watch her child. His former girlfriend also trusted him to watch their daughter. People who knew Stephen said that he took good care of children when he was around them. They said he did not do anything inappropriate with children. Stephen's criminal record was not very serious. He had 2 convictions for driving under the influence of alcohol. He also had arrests for minor offenses. But he did not have a history of violent crimes. His main problem was alcohol. His drinking caused problems in his relationships. He would drink too much and black out. His drinking was a pattern that continued throughout his adult life. In April 1998, Stephen met a woman named Kesha Fry. They started dating. Kesha Fry had 2 young daughters. Her older daughter was named Ashley and was 2 years old. Her younger daughter was named Autumn Breeze Carter and was 6 months old. A short time after they met, Stephen moved in with Kesha Fry and her 2 daughters. He lived with them in their apartment in Mansfield, Ohio. Around the middle of September 1998, Kesha Fry asked Stephen to move out. She asked him to leave because of his heavy drinking. She did not want him to drink so much while living with her and her children. Stephen promised her that he would stop drinking. He made a promise to change his behavior. Because he made this promise, Kesha allowed him to move back into the apartment. Around the same time, Stephen was fired from his job. He lost his employment. After he lost his job, he began watching Kesha's 2 children while she went to work. He stayed home with Ashley and Autumn during the day. Kesha trusted him to take care of her children. This was the situation in Stephen's life in late September 1998. He was living with Kesha and her 2 daughters. He was not working. He was watching the children during the day, and he had a long history of heavy drinking and blacking out that continued to affect his life. On September 28, 1998, Kesha Fry arrived home from work at 2:30 p.m. Stephen Smith was at the apartment with her 2 daughters, Ashley and Autumn. Shortly after Fry got home, she and Smith left the apartment with the 2 children. They went out to run some errands. They also ate dinner at a Burger King restaurant. After that, they went to visit one of Smith's friends. The friend's name was Brett Samples. They arrived at Samples' house and stayed there for some time. While they were visiting, Smith drank 3 beers. He also played pool. They left Samples' house at 7:30 p.m. On the way home, Smith stopped at a gas station. He bought a 12-pack of beer. The brand was Busch Ice. He opened one of the beers and drank it while they were still in the car. They arrived back at the apartment around 8 p.m. When they got inside, Fry locked the 2 outer doors of the apartment. Once they were inside, Smith changed Autumn's diaper. He fed the baby. Then he dressed her in a pink sleeper, which is a one-piece outfit for sleeping. At around 10:15 p.m., Smith took Autumn upstairs and put her to sleep in her crib. Fry put her other daughter, Ashley, to bed at 10:30 p.m. After the children were in bed, Fry went back downstairs. She watched television with Smith. While they watched TV, Smith drank more beer. He continued drinking from the 12-pack he had bought. Shortly after that, Fry and Smith went upstairs together. Smith removed his cut-off shorts and his red underwear. Then they had sexual intercourse. During this act, Smith did not ejaculate. Fry later stated that Smith did not seem upset about this. He did not show any anger or frustration. After they finished, Fry and Smith went back downstairs. They watched more television. Smith continued to drink more beer. At 11 p.m., Fry went upstairs to go to sleep. She checked on her children. She brought Ashley into her own bed to sleep with her. She left Autumn in her crib. Smith stayed downstairs. He remained in the living room watching television and drinking beer. Several hours passed. At around 3:22 a.m. on September 29, 1998, Fry was awakened. Smith was standing next to her bed. He was completely naked. He placed Autumn down beside Fry on the bed. Autumn was also completely naked. Fry reached out to pick up her baby. When she picked Autumn up, she noticed that Autumn's head fell loosely over her arm. The baby's head did not hold itself up. Fry then placed her hand on Autumn's stomach. She realized that the baby was not breathing. Fry looked at Smith and told him, "You killed my baby." In response, Smith threw an alarm clock across the room. He said that the baby was not dead. He insisted that Autumn was still alive. Fry quickly left the apartment. She carried Autumn's naked body in her arms. She also took her 2-year-old daughter Ashley with her. She ran to the apartment of her neighbors, Maya Brooks and Jeff Pierce. When Brooks opened the door, Fry screamed, "He killed my baby! He killed my baby! Maya, help me!" Fry entered the neighbor's apartment with her children. Brooks immediately called 911 for emergency help. While they were waiting for the ambulance, Smith came to the neighbor's door. He asked what Fry was doing. He exclaimed that he did not do anything. He also asked, why was she fucking lying? He was denying any responsibility. The neighbor, Maya Brooks, shut the door on Smith. She did not let him inside. Emergency medical personnel arrived at the scene. They found Autumn's naked and lifeless body lying on a blanket. They observed visible injuries on her head. They also saw bruising around her eyes. The medics began CPR immediately. They tried to revive the baby. Autumn was then transported to the hospital. At the hospital, the emergency room doctor examined Autumn. Upon her arrival, Autumn had no pulse. The doctor found that she had suffered a retinal hemorrhage, which is bleeding in the back of the eye. The doctor also saw bruising around Autumn's rectum. He observed that the opening of her vagina was 10 times the normal size for a baby her age. These injuries were consistent with sexual abuse. The medical team tried to resuscitate Autumn for close to 1 hour. Despite all their efforts, they could not save her. Autumn Breeze Carter was pronounced dead. Back at the apartment building, a neighbor named Jeff Pierce observed Smith. He saw Smith throw a trash bag into a dumpster outside the building. Pierce heard Smith say that he did not do anything. Smith also said that he was leaving. Pierce told Smith to stay with him. Smith agreed to stay. Police officers arrived at the crime scene. They entered Fry's apartment. They saw no signs of forced entry. This meant that no one had broken in through a door or window. The television in the living room had been left on. It was extremely loud. The police found Autumn's pink baby sleeper under the coffee table. They also found Smith's cut-off shorts and his jeans near the couch. In the same area near the baby swing and the sofa, they found pieces of whitish-colored material scattered on the floor. This material was later determined to be pieces of shredded diaper. Small piles of Autumn's hair were found on the coffee table. The police also went to the outside trash dumpster. They retrieved the garbage bag that Pierce had seen Smith throw away. Inside that bag, they found a torn baby diaper, Smith's t-shirt, and 10 empty cans of Busch Ice beer. An officer approached Smith, who was standing outside the apartment. Before the officer could ask him any questions, Smith said, "I didn't do it. I didn't do it." Smith smelled strongly of alcohol. He was disheveled and his clothes were not neat. He swayed back and forth while he was speaking to the officer. The officer arrested Smith for public intoxication. Later that morning, at 11 a.m., Smith's blood alcohol level was tested. The result was 0.123. This was well above the legal limit for driving. At the police station, a detective interviewed Smith. In this first interview, Smith told the detective that he had drunk only 4 beers during the entire day and night. He said that he and Fry had gone to bed at midnight. He claimed that he was awakened by Fry, who was accusing him of killing her daughter. This was his first version of events. Nearly 1 month later, on October 27, 1998, Smith gave a second statement to the police. In this second statement, he changed his story. He now said that he had consumed 3 beers at Samples' house. He also said he drank 6 additional beers after he returned to the apartment. That made a total of 9 beers. In this new version, Smith said that after they returned home, they put Autumn to sleep in the baby swing. They put Ashley to sleep on the downstairs love seat. He also said that he and Fry had sexual intercourse on the living room couch while the 2 children were asleep in the same room. According to this new statement, Smith said he woke up at 3:25 a.m. He said he believed something was wrong with Autumn, so he carried her upstairs while he yelled for Fry. At that point, he said, Fry grabbed Autumn and accused him of killing her. On November 3, 1998, Smith signed this second statement. In follow-up questions, he denied putting trash in the dumpster on the morning of the crime. He also claimed that the cotton materials found on the living room floor were baby wipes that Ashley had put there. The coroner performed an autopsy on Autumn's body. He found that the baby died from 2 things: compression asphyxia and blunt trauma to the head. Compression asphyxia means that the baby could not breathe because something heavy was pressing on her body. The injuries to Autumn's head and the abrasions on her forehead, cheek, and chin showed that she had been lying on her stomach. Her face had been forced into a pillow. Contusions, which are deep bruises, on her buttocks indicated that they had been under pressure from the weight of another person. The coroner also found that Autumn suffered subarachnoid and retinal hemorrhages. These are consistent with shaken baby syndrome. This indicated that someone had tried to restrain the baby by shaking her. Other bruises and abrasions showed that the baby had resisted the attack. Autumn was also missing hair from the back of her head. This was evidence that someone had grasped the back of her head and pulled her hair out. The coroner also confirmed the injuries to Autumn's vagina and anus. Her clitoris was red. Her vagina was enlarged. There was a hemorrhage in her anus. All of these findings were indicative of attempted penetration. Forensic testing found human blood on 2 seat cushions and on Autumn's pink sleeper. DNA testing showed that the blood on the cushions and the sleeper matched Autumn's DNA. Smith was excluded as the source of that blood. No semen was found anywhere on the evidence. After Smith was arrested for public intoxication on the morning of September 29, 1998, the case moved into a formal investigation. The Richland County authorities gathered all the evidence from the apartment, the dumpster, and the hospital. They also collected Smith's statements and the forensic reports from the coroner. Based on this evidence, the case was presented to a grand jury. The grand jury indicted Smith on 2 counts of aggravated murder. Each count included 2 death penalty specifications. The first specification was that the murder happened during the commission of rape or attempted rape. The second specification was that Smith purposely caused the death of a child under the age of 13. Each count also included a sexual motivation specification and a sexually violent predator specification. The trial began in early 1999. During the trial, the prosecution presented the physical evidence, the autopsy findings, and the testimony of witnesses including Kesha Fry, the neighbors, the police officers, the emergency room doctor, and the coroner. The prosecution argued that Smith had intentionally killed Autumn during a violent sexual assault that lasted between 10 and 30 minutes. They showed the jury photographs of Autumn's injuries. The prosecution also pointed to Smith's actions after the crime, such as throwing evidence in the dumpster and denying responsibility, as proof that he knew what he had done. Smith's defense team did not have him testify in his own defense. They followed the advice of his attorneys. Instead, the defense called expert witnesses. One expert was a forensic toxicologist who testified that Smith's blood alcohol level at the time of the crime would have been extremely high, possibly between 0.36 and 0.60. The defense argued that Smith was so intoxicated that he could not have formed the intent to kill. They asked the jury to consider that Autumn's death might have been an accident that happened during a sexual assault. They also called witnesses who testified that Smith was a heavy drinker who had blacked out in the past. His sister and his former girlfriend testified that he had taken good care of children in the past. The jury considered all the evidence. They found Smith guilty on both counts of aggravated murder. After the guilt phase, the trial moved to the penalty phase. In this phase, the jury had to decide whether Smith should receive the death penalty or life in prison. The defense presented mitigating evidence. This included testimony from Smith's mother, who described his difficult childhood and the abuse he suffered. A clinical psychologist testified that Smith had a low average IQ of 80, suffered from depression and alcoholism, and had impaired judgment. The defense also pointed out that Smith had no significant criminal record other than DUI convictions. The jury deliberated on the penalty. They recommended the death penalty on each aggravated murder charge. The trial court then held a sentencing hearing. The judge followed the jury's recommendation. On March 25, 1999, the trial court sentenced Stephen T. Smith to death on each count. The court found that the aggravating circumstances outweighed the mitigating factors. After the sentencing, Smith's legal team filed a direct appeal to the Ohio Supreme Court. In 2002, the Ohio Supreme Court issued its decision. The court rejected all of Smith's arguments. They upheld his conviction and his death sentence. The court found that the trial court did not err by refusing to instruct the jury on involuntary manslaughter. They also found that the evidence of intoxication did not require a jury instruction on voluntary intoxication. The court said the violence of the attack proved intent. They also ruled that the autopsy photographs and slides were admissible because they were relevant to the coroner's testimony and to proving intent. The court also rejected claims about prosecutorial misconduct and ineffective assistance of counsel. The court then independently reviewed the death sentence and found it appropriate and proportionate compared to other cases. Following the direct appeal, Smith pursued federal habeas corpus relief. This is a legal process where a state prisoner asks a federal court to review whether his constitutional rights were violated. In 2010, the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit decided the case of Smith versus Bradshaw. The federal court denied Smith's petition. They ruled that several of his claims were procedurally defaulted because his trial attorneys had not objected to them at the time. They also ruled that his trial attorneys were not ineffective. The court found that the penalty phase jury instructions had correctly informed the jury that all 12 members had to agree on the death penalty. Finally, the court rejected Smith's claim that he should have received an instruction on the lesser offense of involuntary manslaughter. The federal court noted that under Ohio law at the time, voluntary intoxication could only negate intent if the defendant was so drunk that he could not intend anything. The evidence showed that Smith could still intend things, such as hiding evidence and denying the crime. Therefore, the federal court affirmed the denial of habeas relief. In 2013, with all appeals exhausted, Smith's execution date was set for May 1, 2013. In the months before that date, Smith's attorneys filed a clemency petition with the Ohio Parole Board. They argued that Smith's sentence should be reduced to life in prison. They repeated the argument that he was too drunk to intend to kill Autumn. They also pointed to his difficult childhood and his history of alcoholism. On April 10, 2013, the Ohio Parole Board voted unanimously to deny clemency. The board issued a statement calling Smith's crime among the worst of the worst. They said the attack was so ferocious that it proved Smith intended to kill the baby. They also said that his turbulent childhood was far outweighed by the nature of the crime. After the parole board's decision, the case went to Ohio Governor John Kasich. Governor Kasich had the power to grant clemency and commute the death sentence to life in prison. On April 17, 2013, Governor Kasich rejected Smith's plea for mercy. He upheld the parole board's recommendation without providing a detailed explanation. The decision was final. Smith's execution would proceed as scheduled. On the evening of April 30, 2013, Smith spent his last night on death row at the Chillicothe Correctional Institution. He was then transferred to the state prison in Lucasville, Ohio, where the executions take place. That night, prison officials said he ate his final meal. He requested pepperoni pizza with ham and sausage, fried fish and fries, chocolate ice cream, and Mountain Dew soda. He also listened to a Cincinnati Reds baseball game on the radio as they played the St. Louis Cardinals. He spent time with his 21-year-old daughter, Brittany, and his niece. He also mailed some letters. On the morning of May 1, 2013, at approximately 10:04 a.m., Smith walked into the death chamber. He was flanked by prison guards. He declined to say any final words. When the warden asked if he had any last words, he answered, "No." He looked at his daughter, who was sitting behind a pane of glass. She wept and said, "I love you." Smith turned his head away. His chin shook as if he was struggling not to cry. The lethal injection procedure then began. The drug used was pentobarbital, a powerful sedative. Smith took several heavy breaths. Then he closed his eyes. At 10:29 a.m., he was pronounced dead. In the witness room, separated by a wall, Autumn's mother, Kesha Fry, watched quietly. After Smith was declared dead, Fry's sister pumped her fists in the air. Fry said, "I'm glad he's dead, and I hope he burns in hell." Fry's father, Patrick Hicks, who was Autumn's grandfather, said that Smith's execution was too good for him. He said, "Because of him, Autumn never had a chance to take her first step. She never had her first birthday or a first day of school. It's just unfortunate that this man gets to die a peaceful death after the torture he put Autumn through." Smith's daughter, Brittany, had stated days before the execution that she never believed her father killed Autumn. She said he had only admitted to the crime because he had given up hope. After the execution, Smith's attorney, Joseph Wilhelm, said that his client had felt great remorse for the crime he committed. He said Smith had been well behaved and sober while in prison and had lived with guilt every day. Wilhelm also said that Ohio was no safer having executed Smith than if he had lived the rest of his life in prison. Stephen T. Smith became the 51st inmate executed in Ohio since the state resumed executions in 1999. He was the 10th person executed in the United States in 2013. His death sentence was carried out for the aggravated murder of 6-month-old Autumn Breeze Carter, and with his execution, the legal proceedings that began on September 29, 1998, came to their final and complete end. Story 5. Carol Jopar was born on October 18, 1977, in McLennan County, Texas. McLennan County is in central Texas, and the city of Waco is its largest town. Carol was born into a family that had many problems. His childhood was not a happy one. He experienced abuse at home. His lawyers would later describe his upbringing as a hellacious environment. This meant that his home life was full of violence, neglect, and hardship. There was no stability in his early years. Because of this difficult start, Carol did not have the same chances that other children had. He grew up in a poor and troubled part of Waco, where crime and drugs were common. Carol did not stay in school for very long. He dropped out of school in the 3rd grade. He was around 9 years old when he left formal education behind. After that, he spent most of his time on the streets. He learned how to survive in a rough neighborhood. He did not have a normal childhood with toys, games, or family dinners. Instead, he learned how to look after himself in a dangerous world. He became known on the streets of Waco by the nickname Outlaw. This name showed that he had a reputation for being tough and for breaking rules. He did not follow the law, and he did not respect authority. As Carol grew older, he stayed involved in street life. He made friends with people who sold drugs and carried guns. He also had relationships with women. Over the years, he became the father of 5 children. He had children with different mothers, but he was not a steady or reliable father. His life was focused on the streets, not on raising a family. He had no steady job or career. He worked as a laborer sometimes, but mostly he made money through illegal activities. He was not interested in living a normal, lawful life. Carol's criminal behavior started when he was still a young man. On November 26, 1996, he was convicted of 3 counts of delivery of cocaine. This meant he had sold cocaine to other people on 3 separate occasions. He was 19 years old at the time. The court did not send him to prison right away. Instead, the judge placed him on probation. Probation meant that Carol had to follow certain rules and stay out of trouble. If he broke the rules, he would go to prison. But Carol did not take probation seriously. He continued to break the law. On January 8, 1998, the court decided that Carol had violated the terms of his probation. He had not followed the rules that the judge gave him. Because of this violation, his probation was taken away. He was sentenced to 2 years in a state jail. A state jail is a type of prison for less serious felony offenses. Carroll served his time and was released. But being in jail did not change his behavior. He went right back to the same lifestyle. After his release from state jail, Carroll kept getting into trouble with the law. On December 29, 2000, he was convicted of evading arrest. This meant that he ran away from police officers when they tried to catch him. He did not want to be taken into custody. Less than a year later, on December 13, 2001, he was convicted of possession of marijuana. He had been caught with illegal drugs again. These convictions showed a pattern. Carroll did not stop committing crimes. Each time he was caught, he went back to breaking the law again. During this time, Carroll was also connected to more serious violent incidents. There was evidence that he had committed a shooting at a residence in 2002. There was also evidence of an assault in 2003. These were violent acts, but he was never formally charged or convicted for them. The police knew about these incidents, but they did not have enough proof to take him to court. Carroll was becoming known not just as a drug dealer, but as someone who was willing to use violence. He did not show regret for the harm he caused. People who knew him said that he was without remorse. He seemed ready and willing to engage in violent acts whenever he thought it was necessary. He did not fear the law, and he did not care about the consequences of his actions. Carroll also had a close friend named Earl Whiteside. Earl was older than Carroll. They spent time together and were involved in the same street activities. Carroll trusted Earl and brought him along on many of his dealings. Together, they moved through the drug world of Waco. Carroll continued to buy and sell drugs. He had connections to other dealers and criminals. He lived his life day by day, always looking for money and always ready to use force if he felt he was being cheated or disrespected. By the end of 2002, Carroll was 25 years old. He had spent most of his life on the streets. He had a long criminal record, a reputation for violence, and no plans to change his ways. He was well known in the drug trade in Waco. He had made many enemies and many allies. He continued to buy and sell marijuana, cocaine, and other drugs. He carried a gun with him at all times. He believed that the only way to survive in his world was to be tough and to never show weakness. He had no steady job, no real home, and no interest in following the rules of society. He was living day by day, and his violent past and criminal habits were only getting worse. His life was a cycle of crime, drugs, and violence. This was the world he knew, and he did not want to leave it. He was deeply involved in the street culture of Waco, and he was known as someone who would do whatever it took to get what he wanted. On January 11, 2003, Carroll Joe Parr continued his life of drug dealing. On that day, he arranged to buy a large amount of marijuana from a young man named Joel Dominguez. Joel Dominguez was 18 years old. He was Hispanic. He sold drugs to make money, and he knew Parr from the streets. The deal was set to happen outside a store called the BNG Convenience Store. This store was located in Waco, Texas, in McLennan County. Parr went to the store to meet Dominguez. When they met, Parr bought 7 pounds of marijuana from Dominguez. He paid $2,500 for the drugs. After the money changed hands and the marijuana was given to Parr, the deal was finished. Parr left the store with the drugs. But Parr was not satisfied with the deal. He had paid $2,500, but he decided that he wanted his money back. He did not want to pay for the marijuana. He wanted to take the drugs and keep his money too. So he came up with a plan to rob Dominguez. He called his friend Earl Whiteside. Earl Whiteside was older than Parr. He was 30 years old at the time. Parr and Whiteside had done things together before. Parr told Whiteside about his plan, and Whiteside agreed to help him. Both men armed themselves with handguns. They got into a car and drove back to the BNG convenience store. They arrived later that evening. When they got to the store, they saw Joel Dominguez standing outside. Dominguez was not alone. He was with his friend Mario Chavez. Mario Chavez was also a young Hispanic man. He was a friend of Dominguez and was there with him at the store. Parr and Whiteside got out of their car. They walked up to Dominguez and Chavez. Both Parr and Whiteside were holding their guns where the two men could see them. Parr and Whiteside pointed the guns at Dominguez and Chavez. They gave them orders. They told the two men to walk to a fenced area that was beside the store. The fenced area was a more private spot. It was away from the main street and the store entrance. Dominguez and Chavez were scared. They had guns pointed at them, so they did what they were told. They walked to the fenced area. Once they were all inside the fenced area, Parr turned his attention to Joel Dominguez. He was angry and wanted his money back. Parr took his handgun and hit Dominguez in the head with it. This is called pistol whipping. He hit Dominguez multiple times. He hit him hard enough to cause injury. While he was hitting him, Parr demanded money. He told Dominguez to give him back all the money that he had been paid for the marijuana. Dominguez was in pain and afraid. He did not want to be shot, so he gave Parr the money. He handed over all the cash that Parr had given him earlier. Parr took the money and put it away. He had gotten what he wanted. He had the marijuana, and he had his money back. But Parr did not stop there. He looked at Whiteside and gave him an order. He said, "Smoke him." This was a street term that meant to shoot them. Parr was telling Whiteside to shoot both Dominguez and Chavez. He wanted to kill them so that they could not identify him later. Whiteside did not want to kill both of them, but he followed the order to shoot. Whiteside raised his gun and shot Mario Chavez. The bullet hit Chavez in the hand. Chavez was wounded, but he was not killed. Parr was not satisfied with this. He wanted both men dead, so Parr raised his own handgun. He pointed it at Joel Dominguez's head. He was standing very close. He pulled the trigger and shot Dominguez in the head at close range. The bullet struck Dominguez and killed him instantly. Joel Dominguez died right there on the ground beside the store. He was only 18 years old. After the shooting, Parr and Whiteside left the scene quickly. They got back in their car and drove away. They did not try to help Dominguez. They did not call for help. They just left his body there. They also left Mario Chavez wounded and bleeding. Chavez survived his wound, but he was very injured and terrified. Parr showed no regret after the shooting. He did not feel sorry for what he had done. Instead, he was angry at Whiteside. He was angry because Whiteside had not killed Mario Chavez. Parr did not want any witnesses left alive. He knew that Chavez could tell the police what had happened. He was frustrated that Whiteside had only wounded Chavez instead of killing him. He told people later that he was upset about this. Parr did not keep the shooting a secret. He told several people that he had killed Dominguez. He confessed to his girlfriend at the time. Her name was Dawana Harrison. He told her that he was the one who shot Dominguez. He also told a friend named Ricky Garcia. He told a cellmate named Kenneth Renault. He also told his friend Damian Montgomery. All of these people heard Parr say that he was the shooter. He did not sound sorry. He did not show any guilt. He spoke about the murder as if it was a normal part of his life. This was not the first time Parr had killed someone. About 1 year earlier, on December 9, 2001, he had committed another murder. The victim was a man named Ronnie Zarazua. Ronnie Zarazua had been planning to testify in court against one of Parr's friends. The friend's name was Milton Crosby. Zarazua was going to be a witness against Crosby. Parr heard about this and decided to stop Zarazua from testifying. He shot and killed Ronnie Zarazua. He did this to protect his friend Crosby. After he killed Zarazua, he dumped the body somewhere. He did not show any regret for this murder either. He told his friend Earl Whiteside about it. He took Whiteside to the place where he had dumped the body. He showed him the site. He told Whiteside that he had killed Zarazua because Zarazua was going to testify against Crosby. He said that he was keeping it real for Crosby. This meant he was being loyal to his friend by killing someone who could hurt him. He also took his girlfriend Dawana Harrison to the site where he had shot Zarazua. He told her the same thing. He said he did it because Zarazua was going to be a witness against his friend. He did not express any sorrow or guilt about this killing either. Par was proud of his violent actions. He believed that violence was the way to solve problems. He thought that killing people was acceptable if it served his purposes. He did not care about the lives of his victims. He only cared about himself, his money, and his reputation. He was known on the streets as outlaw because he did not follow any rules. He had killed at least 2 people. He had committed robberies. He had sold drugs. He had shot at houses and assaulted people. He was a dangerous man who would use a gun without hesitation. The murder of Joel Dominguez was a cold and calculated act. Par had planned to rob Dominguez. He brought a gun and a friend to help him. He forced the victims to a private area so no one would see. He beat Dominguez to get the money. Then he ordered his friend to shoot both men. When Whiteside only wounded Chavez, Par took the matter into his own hands. He shot Dominguez in the head at close range. He did this to make sure Dominguez was dead. He did it because he did not want any witnesses. He did it because he believed he could get away with it. He had gotten away with murder before, so he thought he would get away with this one too. After the murder, Par continued his normal activities. He did not hide or run away. He stayed in Waco. He kept selling drugs. He kept carrying guns. He kept living his street life. He believed that the police would not catch him. He had killed before without being charged. He thought he was clever and untouchable. He had friends who would not talk to the police. He had a reputation that made people afraid to testify against him. He thought he was safe. But there were already signs that something was wrong. Mario Chavez had survived the shooting. He was a witness who had seen Par's face. He had seen Par shoot Dominguez. He knew exactly what happened. Also, Par had told many people that he was the killer. His girlfriend, his friends, and his cellmate all knew the truth. These people could talk to the police if they wanted to. Par did not seem to worry about this. He felt that his friends would stay loyal to him. He also felt that the police did not have enough evidence to prove anything. He went on with his life as if nothing had happened. He continued to commit crimes, and he continued to brag about his violence. He was confident that no one could stop him. The murder of Joel Dominguez did not go unnoticed for long. Mario Chavez had survived the shooting. Although he was wounded in the hand, he was able to get medical help and talk to the police. He told the officers everything that had happened. He gave them a clear description of the 2 men who had attacked them. He identified Carol Joe Par as the man who had pistol-whipped Dominguez and then shot him in the head. He also identified Earl Whiteside as the man who had shot him in the hand. This was the first major piece of evidence that the police had. The police also looked at other sources of information. The BNG convenience store had a surveillance camera. The camera had been recording the area outside the store. The police obtained the video footage from the store. When they watched the footage, they could see Par at the store on the day of the murder. The video showed him there at the time when the crime took place. This was important evidence because Par would later claim that he was not at the store, but the video proved that he was there. The police also interviewed many people who knew Par. They talked to his girlfriend, Dewana Harrison. She told the police that Par had confessed to her that he was the shooter. She said that Par had admitted killing Dominguez. The police also spoke to Ricky Garcia, a friend of Par's. Garcia said the same thing. Par had told him that he did the shooting. They spoke to Kenneth Renault, who had been Par's cellmate. Renault also said that Par had confessed to him. They spoke to Damian Montgomery, another friend. Montgomery also said that Par admitted to the murder. All of these witnesses were willing to testify in court. They were not related to Par, and they had no reason to lie. Their stories all matched. The police now had strong evidence against Par. Based on all of this evidence, the police arrested Carol Joe Par. He was charged with capital murder. Capital murder is the most serious type of murder charge. It applies when a person is killed during the commission of another felony, such as robbery. In this case, Parr had killed Dominguez while robbing him. That made the crime capital murder. The district attorney's office in McLennan County decided to seek the death penalty. They believed that Parr was a continuing danger to society and that his crimes were severe enough to warrant the ultimate punishment. The trial began in May 2004. The jury listened to all the evidence. Mario Chavez testified in court. He pointed at Parr and told the jury that Parr was the man who shot Dominguez. Earl Whiteside also testified. He admitted his own role in the crime, but he said that Parr was the one who gave the order to shoot and that Parr fired the fatal shot. Dawana Harrison testified that Parr had confessed to her. Other witnesses also testified about Parr's confessions. The surveillance video was shown to the jury. The prosecution presented a strong case that left little doubt about Parr's guilt. Parr decided to testify in his own defense. He told the jury a different story. He admitted that he had planned the drug deal with Dominguez. But he said that he was not at the store when the robbery and shooting happened. He claimed that his friend Damian Montgomery was the one who did the shooting. He said that the surveillance video had been doctored by the prosecutors. He said that they had cut and changed the tape to make it look like he was there. But the jury did not believe him. The witnesses were credible, and the video was clear. The jury found Parr guilty of capital murder. After the guilty verdict, the trial moved to the punishment phase. This is where the jury decides whether the defendant should receive life in prison or the death penalty. The prosecution presented evidence about Parr's past behavior. They showed that he had a long criminal record and that he had committed other violent acts, including another murder. They also showed that he had no remorse for his actions. They argued that he would continue to be a danger if he was ever released. The defense tried to show that Parr had a difficult childhood and that this explained his behavior, but the jury was not convinced. After considering all the evidence, the jury answered the special issues in a way that required the judge to impose the death penalty. On May 21, 2004, the judge sentenced Carol Jo Parr to death. After the sentence, Parr began a long series of appeals. He had the right to challenge his conviction and sentence in higher courts. First, his case went to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. This is the highest court in Texas for criminal cases. On June 7, 2006, that court affirmed his conviction and sentence. They found that the trial had been fair and that the evidence was sufficient. Parr then asked the United States Supreme Court to review his case. On January 8, 2007, the Supreme Court denied his request. That meant the direct appeal was over. Parr also filed a state habeas corpus petition. A habeas corpus petition is a way to challenge a conviction based on new issues or claims of constitutional violations. He filed this petition on November 22, 2005. On October 11, 2006, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denied his application. He then filed a federal habeas corpus petition in the United States District Court. On March 28, 2011, that court denied his petition. He appealed that decision to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. On April 30, 2012, the Fifth Circuit affirmed the lower court's denial. Parr then asked the U.S. Supreme Court to review the federal habeas decision. On January 7, 2013, the Supreme Court denied his request. All of his appeals were now exhausted. On February 4, 2013, the 54th Judicial District Court of McLennan County set Parr's execution date for May 7, 2013. During the hearing, the judge asked Parr if there was any legal reason why the death warrant should not be signed. Parr asked about his appellate lawyer, who was not in the courtroom. He also mentioned something about a grand jury issue, but he did not explain what the issue was. The judge went ahead and set the date. In the months before his execution, Parr made some unusual moves. He wrote a letter to the state district judge. In the letter, he said that he wanted to drop his appeals. He said that there was no reason to continue wasting taxpayer money on a fight he knew he would lose. He also said he wanted to end his suffering. His appeals lawyer learned about this letter from a news reporter. The lawyer visited Parr to discuss his wishes. Eventually, Parr withdrew his request to drop the appeals. His lawyer continued to file motions, but all of them were rejected. Parr also tried to make deals with the authorities. He told the district attorney's office that he had killed 16 people in Waco. He offered to lead them to the bodies of some of his victims. In return, he wanted them to dismiss a robbery case against his nephew. The first assistant district attorney met with Parr in prison. But when investigators checked Parr's information, they found that none of it was true. They could not verify any of his claims. The authorities concluded that Parr was trying to manipulate them. They did not take his offer seriously. As the execution date approached, Parr gave an interview to the Associated Press. He continued to insist that he was innocent of Dominguez's murder. He said he was not at the scene and that the video was doctored. He also said that he knew who did it, but he would not name them because he had given his word. He said that he was not afraid of death. He called death a prize and a release. He also said that he agreed with the death penalty in general, but he disagreed with how it was carried out. On May 7, 2013, Parr was taken to the execution chamber at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice in Huntsville, Texas. He was offered a meal, but Texas no longer offers special last meals. Inmates are given the same meal that is served to the rest of the prison unit. Parr ate the regular meal. That evening, the execution was scheduled for after 6 p.m. Before the lethal injection was administered, Parr was given the chance to make a final statement. He spoke to the witnesses. The widow of Joel Dominguez was in the viewing room. Her name was Dashek Zarazu. Parr spoke directly to her. He said, "First of all, Shauna, talk to your brother. He'll tell you the truth about what happened to your husband. I told Bubba to tell you what happened." He did not explain what this meant. Then he made a statement to the world. He said, "I am in the midst of the truth. I am good. I am straight, don't trip." He told his partners to tell them that, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, "I'll be back." He said that his eyes would close but would be opened again. He said that Jesus had got him through. He then told his family that he loved them. He thanked his spiritual advisor. Finally, he told the warden that he was ready. The lethal injection was then started. The drug used was pentobarbital. Parr closed his eyes, yawned, and began snoring. He was pronounced dead at 6:32 p.m. on May 7, 2013. He was 35 years old. He became the fifth person executed in Texas in 2013 and the 497th person executed in Texas since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. After Parr's death, the case was closed. His co-defendant, Earl Dwayne Whiteside, had already been convicted of aggravated robbery. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison for his role in the crime. He remained in custody. Parr's other claims, including the alleged murder of Ronnie Zarazua and his boast of killing 16 people, were never proven in court. The families of his victims were left to mourn. Joel Dominguez's wife attended the execution and saw her husband's killer put to death. But she did not receive a clear confession or an apology from Parr. Carol Jo Parr was executed for the capital murder of Joel Dominguez, and the story of his crimes and their consequences came to a final end. Story 6. Jeffrey DeMond Williams was born on December 16, 1975, in Harris County, Texas. His parents were married to each other for 25 years. His mother worked at a psychiatric hospital. Her job was to enroll children who had emotional problems into school programs. His father was present in his life. The family had enough money to live comfortably. They did not have economic struggles. Williams grew up with both parents available to him at home. When Williams was a young child, his mother noticed that he took longer than normal to learn to walk. He also took longer than normal to learn to talk. She thought these things were unusual, but she did not seek medical help for him at that time. As he got older, his mother helped him with his school work because he did not always understand the instructions his teachers gave him. In grade school, Williams was a loner. He did not have many friends. He kept to himself and did not play with other children very often. When Williams entered high school, he began to have behavioral problems. School officials diagnosed him as emotionally disturbed. This diagnosis came after he was caught breaking into lockers at school. He was also caught stealing items from the mall. These were not small mistakes. They were repeated behaviors that got him in trouble with school authorities. Around this time, the school gave him an intelligence test. The test results showed that he had a verbal IQ score of 79. His performance IQ score was 65. His full-scale IQ score was 70. These scores placed him in what experts called the borderline mentally retarded range. Even though his test scores were low, Williams continued to move from grade to grade. He was not held back. He was placed in some special education classes and some regular classes. He earned passing grades, but his grades were low. His grade point average was 2.19. He graduated from high school on time. He ranked 326 out of 480 students in his class. During his high school years, Williams took other standardized tests. In the 7th grade, he took a test called the Texas Educational Assessment of Minimum Skills. He showed mastery in mathematics, reading, and writing on that test. In the 9th grade, he took the Texas Assessment of Academic Skills test. He passed the reading and writing sections, but he failed the mathematics section. These results showed that his academic abilities were not consistent. He could do well in some subjects and poorly in others. After high school, Williams decided to join the United States Navy. He enlisted and went through basic training. He served in the Navy for some time. However, in 1995, while he was stationed at the Navy base in Yokosuka, Japan, he got into trouble. He had an altercation with a supervisor. He was also charged with insubordination. Because of these incidents, he was confined to the Navy brig for 30 days. After this, he received a general discharge from the Navy. This type of discharge is not dishonorable, but it is not fully honorable either. It meant that the Navy did not consider his service to be completely satisfactory. After leaving the Navy, Williams returned to Texas. He looked for work and found a job as a laborer. He worked for an auto parts supplier. His job was to drive a delivery truck and bring parts to customers. He also worked as a night stockman for a grocery store. This meant he worked at night, putting products on the shelves after the store closed. He had trouble keeping these jobs. He was fired from every job he ever held. The reasons for his firings were not made clear in the records, but he did not stay at any job for a long period of time. In his social life, Williams continued to attend church regularly. He assisted with the congregation. People at his church thought he was a nice person. One church counselor said he was a delightful child and very well-mannered. His Sunday school teachers said he was quiet and reserved. They also noticed that he got along well with the older members of the church. However, he did not develop friendships with other teenagers his age as easily as most young people did. One parent of a high school classmate said Williams was usually quiet and would help when she needed assistance. These observations showed that Williams could be polite and helpful, but he struggled to connect with people his own age. Williams's mother continued to worry about him. She said that by the time he reached high school, she thought that something up there was not right. She meant that she believed there was something wrong with his mind or his thinking, but she did not have him formally tested or treated for these concerns. She simply helped him as best she could. Williams had no prior felony convictions on his record. He had never been to prison for a serious crime. His only criminal record was the Navy confinement for insubordination and the altercation with his supervisor. Throughout his early life, Williams showed signs that he was different from other people. He was slow to learn as a child. He had trouble in school. He had behavioral problems as a teenager. He could not keep a job. He had difficulty making friends. But none of these things were crimes. They were just facts about how he grew up and how he lived his life. He was an adult living in Houston, Texas, trying to get by. He had a mother who cared about him and a church community that accepted him. He did not have a stable work history. He did not have a strong social network. He was simply a young man living in the city, moving from job to job, and staying out of serious trouble with the law. That was the life Jeffrey DeMond Williams lived before the events that would change everything. He was 23 years old. He lived in Harris County, where he had been born and raised. He had no children. He was not married. He spent his days looking for work and his nights doing whatever he did in the city. He continued to attend church. He continued to be a quiet person who kept to himself. And then, on a night in May 1999, his life took a turn that no one in his family or his church could have expected. But that part of the story comes later. On the night of May 19, 1999, Jeffrey DeMond Williams was 23 years old and living in Houston, Texas. He was driving a Lexus automobile through the city. That car was not his. It had been stolen 9 days earlier, on May 10, 1999. The owner of that Lexus was a woman named Jennifer Null. On the day it was stolen, a thief had approached her at gunpoint and demanded her car. The thief tried to force her into the vehicle, but she refused and got away. The thief drove off with the car. Williams was the person driving that stolen Lexus on May 19th. At the same time that Williams was driving the stolen Lexus, a Houston police officer named Troy Blando was working in the same area. Officer Blando was 39 years old. He had been with the Houston Police Department for 19 years. He was assigned to the auto theft detail. His job was to find stolen cars and the people who stole them. On this night, he was dressed in plain clothes. He was not wearing a police uniform. He was driving an unmarked police Jeep Cherokee. No one could tell he was a police officer just by looking at him or his vehicle. However, he was wearing his police badge around his neck. This was a standard practice for officers in his unit. The badge was visible on his chest if someone looked closely. Officer Blando drove into the parking lot of a hotel called the Roadrunner Inn. This hotel was located in southwest Houston on the Southwest Freeway. Blando was driving slowly around the lot. His purpose was to look for vehicles that had been reported stolen. He was doing his regular job. As he drove through the lot, he spotted Williams driving the Lexus. Blando did not stop Williams immediately. Instead, he used a computer in his Jeep to check the license plate or the vehicle identification number of the Lexus. The computer search told him that the Lexus had been stolen in an aggravated robbery. That meant the car was taken from its owner by force or by threat of force. After confirming that the car was stolen, Officer Blando prepared to take action. He did not call for backup. He decided to approach Williams by himself. This was a decision made in the moment based on his training and experience. Williams then exited the stolen Lexus. He got out of the car and stood in the parking lot. At that moment, Officer Blando approached him. Blando had his weapon drawn. He was holding his gun in his hand. According to trial testimony, this was standard practice for police officers in the auto theft division. They were trained to draw their weapons when approaching a suspect who was in a stolen vehicle. This was done for the officer's own safety. Blando confronted Williams. He told Williams that he was under arrest. He tried to place handcuffs on Williams. Williams did not cooperate. Instead, he resisted. He argued with Blando. A witness who was staying at the Roadrunner and heard the argument from her room. She looked out her window and saw two men in the parking lot. One man was white and one man was black. She heard the black man telling the white man not to handcuff him. She later identified the black man as Williams and the white man as Officer Blando. The struggle continued. Blando managed to get one handcuff onto one of Williams's wrists. The other handcuff was still open. At that moment, Williams spun his body around. He pulled a gun from under his shirt. The gun was a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. He pointed it at Officer Blando and fired one shot. The bullet hit Blando in the chest. It was a perforating gunshot wound, meaning the bullet went through his body. Officer Blando also fired his own weapon during the struggle. He was carrying a .380 caliber handgun. He fired his gun, but his shot missed Williams. After shooting Blando, Williams ran away from the parking lot. He fled on foot. He left the stolen Lexus behind in the lot. He also left Officer Blando lying on the ground. Blando was badly wounded, but he was still alive. Despite his injury, he was able to get back to his unmarked Jeep Cherokee. He climbed into the driver's seat. He operated a switch inside the vehicle. This switch was designed to summon emergency help. By activating it, he sent a signal to dispatchers that an officer needed immediate assistance. He was able to radio a description of his attacker before he lost consciousness. An ambulance was called to the scene. However, the ambulance did not arrive quickly. It took 19 minutes for the ambulance to get to the Roadrunner in parking lot. The delay was later investigated by city officials. Fire department dispatchers, supervisors, and even the fire department chief were suspended because of problems with how the call was handled. But for Officer Blando, the delay was fatal. He was put into the ambulance and rushed to the hospital. He died on the way to the hospital. He did not survive his wound. Officer Troy Blando left behind a family. He was married to his wife, Judith. They had a 13-year-old son named Danny. He also had his mother, Della, 2 brothers named Mike and Tracy, and 2 sisters named Vicky and Bobby. His family was large and close. His death affected all of them deeply. They had lost a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. Blando had served his community for nearly 2 decades. He was known as a dedicated investigator who worked hard on his cases. Williams ran away from the scene. He did not get far. But what happened after he fled, how he was found, and what happened next belongs to the next part of the story. At this moment, the crime was complete. Williams had shot a police officer who was trying to arrest him. He had fled the scene. The officer had died. The stolen Lexus was still in the parking lot. One of Officer Blando's handcuffs was still locked around Williams's wrist. Williams was still carrying the 9mm pistol he had used to shoot Blando. That gun was the same weapon that had been used in another shooting in January of that year. A man named Ezed McCowan had been shot during a robbery, and witnesses identified Williams as the gunman in that incident as well. But that evidence would be presented later. For now, Williams was just a man running from the parking lot, trying to get away. After Williams ran away from the Roadrunner in parking lot, police officers from the Houston Police Department responded to Officer Blando's emergency call. They arrived at the scene and found Blando's Jeep Cherokee. They also found the stolen Lexus. They immediately began searching the area for the shooter. The search did not take very long. Williams was arrested about 1 block from the scene of the shooting. He was found by officers who were looking for a suspect matching the description Blando had radioed before he died. When the officers caught Williams, he was still wearing one of Officer Blando's handcuffs on his wrist. The other handcuff was open. He was still carrying the 9mm semi-automatic pistol that he had used to shoot Officer Blando. The officers took the gun from him. They also took the handcuff. They brought him back to a location near the scene of the shooting. Sergeant John Swaim and Officer Alan Brown were assigned to take custody of Williams. They transported him to the police station at 1200 Travis Street in Houston. At the station, they read Williams his Miranda rights. These rights informed him that he had the right to remain silent and the right to have an attorney present. Williams said that he understood his rights. He then gave 2 recorded statements to the police. In these statements, he admitted that he shot Officer Blando. However, he said that he shot in self-defense. He told the officers that he did not know Blando was a police officer. He claimed that he thought Blando was a robber trying to take his car or rob him. He said that when Blando grabbed him and put the handcuff on him, he was afraid for his life, so he pulled his gun and fired. He also said that Blando used a racial slur against him during the struggle. The police did not stop their investigation after Williams's confessions. They collected evidence from the scene. They found shell casings from 3 different weapons. Officer Blando had fired a .380 caliber gun, and the police found those shell casings. Williams had fired a 9mm gun, and the police found those shell casings as well. They also found shell casings from another weapon, which were later linked to other crimes. The police tested the bullet that killed Officer Blando. They matched it to Williams's 9mm pistol. They also found Williams's fingerprints on the stolen Lexus. They found his fingerprints on Officer Blando's unmarked Jeep Cherokee as well. This evidence placed Williams at the scene and connected him directly to Blando's vehicle and the stolen car. The investigation also looked into the ambulance delay. Officers wanted to know why it took 19 minutes for help to arrive after Blando activated his emergency switch. An investigation was launched into the Houston Fire Department's ambulance dispatch desk. As a result of the investigation, 2 dispatchers, 2 supervisors, and the fire department chief were suspended. The city acknowledged that the system had failed Officer Blando, but this did not change the fact that Blando had already died from his wound. On July 21, 1999, a grand jury in Harris County indicted Williams for the murder of Officer Troy Blando. The charge was capital murder. Under Texas law, the killing of a police officer is capital murder if the officer was acting in the line of duty and if the killer knew that the victim was a police officer. The prosecution built its case around the evidence they had collected. They planned to show that Williams knew Blando was an officer and that he shot him anyway. The trial began in January 2000. The prosecution presented its case to the jury. They showed the jury the printout from Blando's mobile data terminal that proved the Lexus was stolen. They played the tape of Blando's last communications with dispatch. They played the audio-taped confessions that Williams gave to the police. They called the 2 eyewitnesses who had seen the shooting from the hotel rooms. One witness testified that she heard arguing and saw the 2 men struggling. She said she heard Williams telling Blando not to handcuff him. She saw Williams spin around and shoot Blando after one handcuff was on. The prosecution also called the officer who responded to Blando's emergency call. That officer testified that when he arrived at the scene, Blando was wearing his badge around his neck. He stated that the badge was visible and that Williams would have seen it during the struggle. The prosecution also presented evidence that Williams had committed other violent crimes. They showed that the same 9mm gun used to kill Blando had been used in an armed robbery and shooting in January 1999, where the victim was a man named Ezed McCowan. They also presented the owner of the stolen Lexus, Jennifer Null, who testified that her car had been taken from her at gunpoint 9 days before the murder. Williams's defense team did not call any witnesses during the guilt phase of the trial. They relied on Williams's statements to police, where he claimed he acted in self-defense and did not know Blando was an officer. They argued that because Blando was in plain clothes and an unmarked car, Williams had no way of knowing he was a police officer. They also argued that Blando never verbally identified himself as an officer before trying to arrest Williams. However, the jury did not find this argument convincing. The evidence against Williams was strong. The eyewitnesses, the fingerprints, the gun, the handcuff, and the confessions all pointed to his guilt. On February 3, 2000, The jury found Jeffrey DeMond Williams guilty of capital murder. The trial then moved to the punishment phase. The jury had to decide whether Williams should receive the death penalty or life in prison. The prosecution presented additional evidence to show that Williams was a continuing threat to society. They reminded the jury of the stolen car robbery and the shooting of Ezed McCowan. They told the jury that Williams had confessed to committing several robberies. They showed that he had no remorse for killing Officer Blando. The defense presented witnesses to try to save Williams's life. His mother testified on his behalf. She talked about his childhood, his difficulties in school, and his behavioral problems. She said she believed something was wrong with his mind. Other witnesses from his church testified that he was polite and helpful. A Sunday school teacher said he was quiet and well-mannered. These witnesses were trying to show that Williams had good qualities and that he was not a completely evil person. They wanted the jury to give him a life sentence instead of death. But the prosecution pointed out that Williams had been fired from every job he ever had, that he had a history of behavioral problems, and that he had committed serious crimes. They argued that he would always be dangerous. After hearing all the evidence, the jury answered the special questions required under Texas law. They found that Williams posed a future danger to society. They also found that there was not enough mitigating evidence to warrant a life sentence. Based on these answers, the judge sentenced Williams to death by lethal injection. The date was February 3, 2000. After the trial, Williams began the appeals process. This is a standard part of death penalty cases. His conviction and sentence were automatically reviewed. On May 8, 2002, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed his conviction and sentence. This meant that the state's highest criminal court found no errors in the trial. Williams did not file a petition with the United States Supreme Court at that time. Williams then filed a state habeas corpus petition. This is a request for the court to review whether his imprisonment is lawful. His first state habeas petition was denied by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals on April 2, 2003. He filed a second state habeas petition in 2003. In this second petition, he raised a new claim. He argued that he was mentally retarded and that executing him would violate the Eighth Amendment to the United States Constitution. This argument was based on a 2002 Supreme Court case called Atkins v. Virginia, which said that executing mentally retarded people is unconstitutional. The Texas court dismissed his second petition on October 8, 2003. The court found that Williams had not provided enough specific facts to support his claim of mental retardation. Williams then took his case to federal court. On July 20, 2004, he filed a federal habeas corpus petition in the United States District Court for the Southern District of Texas. He raised several claims, including his mental retardation claim. The federal district court agreed to hold an evidentiary hearing on his mental retardation claim. This hearing took place in April and May 2006. During the hearing, both sides presented experts and witnesses. Williams's lawyers brought in his family members, teachers, and former supervisors from the Navy. They presented IQ test scores that ranged from 65 to 71. They argued that he had adaptive deficits, meaning he could not take care of himself properly. They pointed to his trouble with jobs, his problems following instructions, and his difficulty with social relationships. The state presented its own experts. They pointed out that on one of the IQ tests, Williams scored lower than a person would score by randomly guessing. They argued that this meant Williams was deliberately giving wrong answers and not putting in his best effort. They also showed that Williams had passed several academic achievement tests in school. He had earned passing grades in regular classes. He had graduated from high school on time. He had served in the Navy and held jobs. The magistrate judge who heard the evidence issued a 78-page report. The magistrate judge said that the case was a close call. He recommended that the district court reject Williams's mental retardation claim. The judge noted that the root of Williams's problems in school was behavioral, not intellectual. On January 8, 2007, the federal district court adopted the magistrate's recommendation and denied Williams's habeas petition. The court did grant Williams a certificate of appealability on his Atkins claim, which allowed him to appeal. Williams appealed to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. The Fifth Circuit reviewed the evidence and agreed with the district court. They found that Williams was not mentally retarded. They noted that his low test scores were likely the result of him not trying, rather than true intellectual disability. They also found that his adaptive behavior was not consistently impaired. He had been able to function in school, in the military, and in the workplace. On September 19, 2008, the Fifth Circuit affirmed the district court's denial of habeas relief. They also denied his request for a certificate of appealability on his other claims. Williams then filed a petition for a writ of certiorari with the United States Supreme Court. This is a request for the Supreme Court to hear the case. On November 1, 2010, the Supreme Court denied his petition. This meant that the federal courts had finished their review. Williams had exhausted his legal options. He was now scheduled for execution. In the months leading up to his execution, Williams's lawyers made one last attempt to save his life. They filed a new petition in federal court. They claimed that his trial lawyer had failed to adequately investigate the case and that his appeals lawyer had missed deadlines. They cited a recent Supreme Court ruling that allowed reconsideration of ineffective counsel claims in some circumstances. They asked the court to stop the execution. The federal district court denied their requests. The Fifth Circuit also denied their requests. On the day of his scheduled execution, Williams's lawyers made one final appeal to the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court rejected the appeal about 1 hour before the execution time. On May 15, 2013, Jeffrey DeMond Williams was scheduled to be executed at the Huntsville unit in Huntsville, Texas. This is the state's execution facility. He was offered a last meal, but Texas no longer offers special last meals to condemned inmates. Instead, he was given the same meal that was served to the rest of the unit. He did not have any family or friends attend the execution on his behalf. No one came to the viewing room that was provided for his supporters. Before the execution, a crowd of law enforcement officers gathered outside the prison. They came to show support for Officer Blando. Members of the Thin Blue Line Law Enforcement Motorcycle Club arrived on their motorcycles. They revved their engines to drown out any protesters who were present. A group of Houston police officers, including the president of the Houston Police Officers Union, went inside to witness the execution from a separate viewing room. Williams was brought into the execution chamber. He was given the opportunity to make a final statement. He chose to speak. He addressed the witnesses in the viewing room. He called them "you clown police." He accused them of getting away with murder all the time. He said, "You're gonna stop killing innocent kids, murdering young kids. When I kill one or pop one, you'll want to kill me." He then said that God has a plan for everything. He said, "I love everyone that loves me. I ain't got no love for anyone that don't love me." He did not apologize for his crime. He did not express any remorse for killing Officer Blando. After finishing his statement, he told the warden that he was ready. The lethal injection was then started. The drug used was pentobarbital. Williams raised his head a couple of times after the drug was administered. Then he closed his eyes and began to snore before falling silent. He was pronounced dead at 6:36 p.m. Central Daylight Time. He was 37 years old. After the execution, the Houston Police Officers Union president spoke to the media. He said that Williams had continued to ridicule the police up to the very end. He called Williams a thug and said he had no sympathy for him. The officers who had witnessed the execution left the prison. The crowd of supporters outside dispersed. The case of Officer Troy Blando was finally over. Officer Blando's family was not present at the execution. His wife Judith and his son Danny had moved from Houston to Meridian, Texas. Danny graduated from high school and later joined the United States Navy, following in his father's footsteps. Judith continued to live with her family. The rest of the Blando family also continued their lives, but they never forgot what happened to Troy. In the aftermath of the shooting, the Texas legislature passed a new law. It was named the Troy Blando Motor Vehicle Theft Prevention Act. The law imposed tighter regulations on private motor vehicle title service companies. Its purpose was to deter car theft and insurance fraud. This was a small measure of justice and remembrance for a fallen officer. Jeffrey DeMond Williams was executed for the capital murder of Houston Police Officer Troy Blando, and the case was finally closed.